Marcus Wilkerson had always believed in the power of flowers. Growing up in the south side of Atlanta, he was surrounded not by gardens, but by cracked sidewalks, chain link fences, and the steady hum of city buses. Still, his mother, Clarice, kept a small row of potted plants on their window ledge: roses, tulips, and her favorite, jasmine. She would say, "Even in concrete, beauty finds a way." That phrase shaped Marcus's world more than he realized. While other kids dreamed of basketball fame or escaping their neighborhood by any means necessary, Marcus dreamed of petals, stems, and the art of arrangement. After high school, he took whatever jobs he could to support his dream: janitor, delivery driver, even night shift at a diner. During the day, he studied floral design online, saved every dollar, and practiced arrangements with whatever flowers he could afford from discount grocers or wholesalers. Eventually, he opened a tiny floral studio tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. It wasn't much, but it was his. He called it Wilkerson Blooms, a tribute to the name his mother had proudly given him and to the promise he made to himself: to create beauty where people least expected it. Marcus quickly gained a loyal following. His style was unique, blending classic elegance with bold, modern creativity. He played with texture, negative space, and color like a painter. People often said his arrangements told stories. Word spread through the local community, then beyond. He had done flowers for baby showers, anniversaries, art events, and even small weddings, but he had never been hired by anyone truly wealthy until that one Tuesday morning. The call came just after 9 a.m. The woman on the line introduced herself as Victoria, a representative from an exclusive wedding planning agency. She said a client had seen photos of Marcus's work on Instagram and was interested in hiring him for a large wedding. The bride, she added, came from a prominent family in the region, the Lawsons. Marcus knew the name. They owned real estate, car dealerships, and were frequent donors to political campaigns. Old Southern money. This was no ordinary event. "We're considering several designers," Victoria said crisply, "but the bride was intrigued by your flair. She'd like a consultation. Are you available tomorrow?" Marcus nearly dropped the phone. This was the break he had waited for, the kind of opportunity that could lift his business from surviving to thriving. Still, something in the woman's tone made him pause. The way she said flair didn't sound entirely like a compliment, but he pushed the thought aside. This was a door opening, and he would walk through it prepared. He spent the rest of the day sketching designs, assembling his best portfolio pieces, and carefully planning how to present his vision. That night, as he locked up his studio, he looked up at the faded sign above the door, Wilkerson Blooms, and whispered to himself, "This could change everything." He had no idea that the path ahead would be filled with challenge, pride, and the kind of test he had spent his whole life preparing to overcome. Marcus arrived at the Lawson estate just before noon the next day, dressed sharply in a charcoal blazer, pressed slacks, and polished shoes. His portfolio was neatly tucked under his arm, and despite the early Georgia humidity, he remained composed. As he pulled into the long, winding driveway, his eyes scanned the landscape: manicured lawns, hedges trimmed with military precision, and a fountain that sparkled like something out of a magazine. The house itself was enormous, with white columns, black shutters, and a front porch wide enough to park a car. Everything screamed wealth, legacy, and something else. Something colder. He was greeted at the door not by the wedding planner or a staff member, but by the bride herself, Ashley Lawson. She was tall, thin, and poised, like someone who had been trained her whole life to walk into a room and own it. Her platinum blonde hair was swept into a perfect bun, and her designer blouse looked like it had never touched a hanger. She looked at Marcus with an expression that was unreadable at first, but then her eyebrows rose slightly and her lips parted, just enough to show surprise. It wasn't the friendly kind. "You're Marcus?" she asked, her tone level but sharp around the edges. "Yes, ma'am," he said, extending a hand. "No, Marcus Wilkerson, owner and lead designer at Wilkerson Blooms. It's a pleasure." She hesitated just a beat too long before taking his hand. Her grip was limp, her eyes already drifting toward the large foyer behind her. "Well, come in. We don't have all day." The inside of the house was as grand as the outside. Sweeping staircases, chandelier light cascading across polished marble, and framed oil paintings of generations of Lawsons staring down from the walls. Marcus followed Ashley into a formal sitting room where swatches of fabric, sample menus, and glossy bridal magazines were spread across a long table. She sat down without offering him a seat. Marcus remained standing for a moment before gently pulling out a chair himself. Ashley began flipping through her wedding binder with theatrical impatience. "So, the planner showed me your Instagram. You have a very distinct style," she said, that last word bending under the weight of condescension. "We're going for something classic, elegant, old-world charm. Think French chateau, not—" She stopped and glanced at him, as if trying to find a word she wouldn't regret saying out loud. "Not overdone." Marcus smiled politely. "Of course. I've brought several design boards that reflect both classical influence and modern refinement. I'd love to hear your vision and blend it with a signature that's uniquely yours." She waved a hand. "Let's just see what you have." He opened his binder and began explaining the arrangements. Soft cream and blush tones, cascading florals down spiral staircases, suspended floral chandeliers, and sculpted garden-style bouquets that reflected a refined European palette. But Ashley barely looked at them. Instead, she kept glancing at him, almost distracted by the fact that he was sitting there at all. At one point, she said, "This feels a little dramatic. We don't want anything loud or too urban." Marcus paused. "Everything you see here is within the formal palette you requested. The lines, the structure, even the blooms. These are the same varieties used at royal weddings and historical estates. I assure you, there's nothing loud about peonies and garden roses." Ashley smiled thinly. Maybe tone it down a little? Simple is better. Also, please avoid anything too trendy. We want timeless. My mother says, timeless never tries too hard." Marcus didn't respond. He simply nodded, even as a knot began to form low in his stomach. He'd had clients with strong opinions before. That was normal. But this was different. It wasn't just about taste. It was about control, about status, about reminding him, without ever saying it outright, that she was above him. As he packed up to leave, she said, "We're still considering other options. But my planner said you were refreshing. We'll see if that's the right fit." Marcus thanked her and walked out with dignity. But as he reached the porch steps, he heard her say softly, just loud enough for her friend beside her to hear, "Refreshing is one word for it." They both giggled. He didn't turn around. He got into his car, closed the door, and sat there for a long moment. His hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. Then, slowly, he let out a breath and whispered to himself, "They don't have to believe in me. I believe in me." And with that, he drove away. Not discouraged, but more determined than ever. The days following the meeting with Ashley Lawson were quiet but heavy. Marcus threw himself into his work, filling orders, refreshing his studio displays, and sketching ideas late into the night. But the weight of that meeting lingered. Her tone, her gaze, the way she spoke as if he were an intern, not a professional. He'd encountered prejudice before, overt and subtle, but something about this felt more personal, like an evaluation of his worth beyond his skills. Still, he reminded himself of why he started, not to prove anything to people like Ashley, but to honor his mother, to build something lasting, to inspire the kids who came into his shop, wide-eyed and curious. A week later, the call came. The Lawsons had selected him. Victoria, the planner, delivered the news with clipped efficiency. "Ashley liked your clean compositions," she said, though Marcus could almost hear the shrug behind her voice. "She wants to move forward with the basic package. Color palette to be white, ivory, pale champagne. Keep it simple." She emphasized, "No experimentation." He hung up the phone slowly, then sat back in his chair. The basic package was fine. It was still good money. But it wasn't the kind of wedding that would make headlines or shift his career. Not yet. He flipped open his notebook and began drafting ideas within the requested guidelines. He'd keep it professional. He'd do what was expected. But something inside him resisted the idea of playing small, just because someone else feared what he was capable of. The site walkthrough came a few days later. The venue was an enormous estate on the outskirts of Savannah, complete with a private garden, a reflecting pool, and an outdoor terrace where the reception would take place. Ashley was there, along with her mother, a woman who resembled her so closely they could have been mistaken for sisters. The same icy posture, the same guarded smile. They examined Marcus's updated sketches in the shade of a marble gazebo. He kept things subtle: tight floral hedges, minimal color variation, symmetrical installations, exactly what they'd asked for. Still, as he presented, Ashley interrupted often. These hanging things, can you make them smaller? I don't want it to feel like we're in a jungle. Are these roses going to be fully bloomed? I don't like when they look too open. Also, please don't use those wild-looking fillers. My guests are used to refinement. Each comment was delivered with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Her mother didn't say much, but the way she looked at Marcus, calm, distant, and appraising, said enough. He wasn't just a vendor to them. He was an outsider, someone to keep under control. At one point, Ashley's friend, one of her bridesmaids, with a voice full of sugar and steel, leaned over and whispered, "It's so cool you're giving opportunities like this to small businesses." Ashley smiled and replied, not even bothering to lower her voice, "I know, right? My dad says we should uplift people when we can." Marcus stood there, unmoving. He wanted to speak. He wanted to say, "This isn't charity. This is earned." But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he took every word, every dig, every patronizing smile, and he stored it away, not as pain, but as fuel. When he returned to his studio that night, he sat in the dark for a long time, surrounded by buckets of fresh flowers and the soft hum of the refrigerator motors. Then, he picked up his pen. He flipped to a fresh page and began sketching. Not for them. For himself. Not the basic plan they approved. The real vision. Because deep down, he knew. When the day came and the guests walked into that space, they wouldn't remember what Ashley had asked for. They'd remember what he created. Marcus knew that if he played by their rules entirely, he'd disappear into the background. Just another vendor executing someone else's idea of beauty. But he didn't come this far to shrink himself for the comfort of those who couldn't see past their own prejudices. That night, with the soft buzz of his studio as the only sound around him, Marcus made a decision. He would honor the color palette, stay within the contract's guidelines, and deliver exactly what they paid for, on paper. But behind the scenes, he would do something more, something bold, something unforgettable. He reread the contract line by line, looking for any wording that could limit his creative freedom. That's when he saw it. Under a clause about artistic discretion, it stated, "Florist may adjust presentation style within agreed-upon palette and event dimensions at their professional judgment, so long as the final product maintains harmony with overall wedding design." That was it. That one sentence gave him just enough room to breathe. He wouldn't break the rules. He'd simply bend them, beautifully. Marcus began assembling a new plan, one that would balance delicacy and drama, refinement and innovation. The base would still be ivory and champagne, Ashley's required palette, but the way he layered the tones would create depth and light. He sourced rare varieties, gardenias with petal structures that opened like sculpted porcelain, quicksand roses with a silken taupe hue, and imported butterfly ranunculus that shimmered in candlelight. For texture, he chose clouds of soft white gypsophylla, bleached ferns, and Italian ruscus, weaving them into ethereal forms that moved as the wind touched them. But the real centerpiece, the part that made his heart race, was the suspended floral canopy. It would hang above the reception tables like a dream. Thousands of delicate blossoms strung with invisible wire, forming what looked like a floating cloud of flowers. At different angles, the lights would reflect off the petals, making them glow gold in some places and blush in others. It would transform the open-air venue into something sacred, like a cathedral made of nature and light. He sketched it again and again, refining the shape, testing the rigging methods, estimating weight, and adjusting installation logistics. It had to be flawless. He even called in 2 trusted friends from his college design program, artists who now worked in set design, to help him build the structure in secret. He rehearsed everything in his studio, piece by piece. Each night, as the city outside went quiet, Marcus stayed up arranging, testing, adjusting. He'd take short naps on a couch in the back and wake up to the soft scent of flowers filling the room, reminding him why he started. There was no bitterness in his work, only purpose. This wasn't about revenge. It was about presence, about truth, about showing up as his full self, unapologetically. He also prepared the basic version that Ashley had approved, a simpler design with safe choices and predictable shapes. That's what she would expect. That's what she'd preview. But on the morning of the wedding, when the sun rose over the Lawson estate, the real vision would unfold. Marcus didn't tell anyone, not even Victoria, the planner. He'd deliver both options side by side if necessary. And if they rejected it at the last second, fine. He had backup plans. But he didn't think they would, because he knew the moment someone truly saw what he created, they wouldn't be able to forget it. He wasn't just building a wedding setup. He was building a moment of truth that no one could ignore. And when that moment came, he would be ready.